I just got that bass, that beautiful 1960 jazz bass stolen. And I got it stolen. I'd done a gig that I had. I worked with one of James Brown's drummers, and he got me this gig backing up Little Anthony and the Imperials.
You don't remember me. Tears on my pillow.
And here I was playing this gig, and I parked I kept my bass at the gig, and I drove my new Bonneville motorcycle over to the gig every night, chained it up, and went in and played the gig, And anyway, the bass got stolen. So I arrived out in San Francisco with no bass, and I think Bob Harvey's bass ticket.
Bob Harvey lent him his bass to play that first gig.
Out of the band.
You're in, you're out.
Yeah, exactly. And so, it's brutal. So, but I do remember I had a mustache at the time, like a lot of people did in college, a mustache and horn-rimmed glasses or something. And Paul Kantner just didn't like that at all. And they told me I had to lose the stash. So
I remember you cut half of it off.
Yeah, and what did you do? Right.
So I cut half of it off. And later on, I understand that my sense of humor is accepted by Marty. I believe he thought that was okay.
So, tell me about the first rehearsal that you guys played together, that you went after you joined the Airplane.
Well, I thought it was a really undisciplined bunch of guys playing in a band format. Because I'd worked with charts and horn sections and Louis Prima and Ray Charles stuff and all that, and I found this form that was completely loose and more or less without direction, but somehow when we started to play, the direction we found. What I did find that was stifling, because I was really at a very low point in my musical creativity with the instrument, is I didn't have a format to actually start to work and play my own stuff. Later on, I talked to somebody who said, "Jack, you always change the bass parts around and all that stuff you did in DC," but I couldn't really take it to the next step. So I found an atmosphere where I was responsible for writing all my music, we would start songs and write songs ourselves, and that atmosphere didn't exist at that time on the East Coast. There was a leader sideman mentality, where a singer would come in, you work out the arrangements or something like that, but not a band mentality, not a whole team mentality. And I fell into it right away. It was just, I said, this is the greatest. So I had all kinds of different influences. You had Paul Kantner, like Jorma said, he loved the vocal harmonies and the big picture. He liked the big total vocal sound. So I would work out bass sounds for that. Jorma and I had the most affinity for our blues influences and Piedmont style influences and things like that. Although Jorma was now starting to play lead electric guitar, which he had never played in that setup before. So he was learning stuff that way. And then I got Marty. Marty had been a pop singer, a trained pop singer in the early 60s by Capitol Records, had put out, produced pop songs that he had come out of, and then he went into his influences in the folk world. And so that gave me all these varieties. Signe, of course, was a folk singer coming in that. So I had all these influences, and my influences, and my jazz sensibilities, not so much the style, but the fact that I could add more melody to the bass parts, and then I had this format to do it, so it completely was responsible for giving me that palette to work with and improve.
Organized chaos to a certain degree? Because you had so many writers and so many people, coming from different directions.
Yes and no, because Paul especially really knew what he wanted to get. Now that there were never any constraints, put on me as to what I could play and that kind of stuff. But because again, the song always, as we talk when we're teaching the band, the song always comes first anyway. And that's the Airplane was such an amazing vocal band in all its different incarnations. So whatever happened, it had to go along with that stuff. But that said, there was a lot of like for example, Paul is certainly not not a blues-based guy, and his chord changes were very interesting. And Grace later on, when she was like in her Eric Satie period and stuff like that, I mean, some of her compositions like Eskimo Blue Day and stuff like that are awesome, incredibly awesome. So there are all these like blank canvases for guys like me to try to find something that would go along with it. I was talking to one of the guys at this guy Doug that played with us last night at the presentation, a really incredible guitar player, and I heard him do a lot of different stuff. That's something I couldn't do. I said, that's awesome. I said, but the good news is I've always only had to sound like me.
Right.
But anyway, so the chaos was, and there were no charts for us. But the lack of chaos was that it had to fit the song and make the song work.
Mm-hmm. And as you were working out, so what was the process? You know, let's say as you're going in to record, the first record. Was everybody bringing sort of completed songs?
Well, the first record was, because we came in as a band.
Yeah.
And that's actually not a good example in a sense, because that was our set that we performed, and much of it fleshed out of the Matrix. And so we came in there and recorded that on a 3-track.
3 tracks.
At sunset time, right? 2 tracks to record, 1 to bounce. And we came in as a band. I remember we were in Studio A, which is gigantic. You put 101 Modavani's 101 strings in there. And there's this little 4-piece band in the center of the room, and it's just massive.
Was this in Los Angeles? Was this here?
Yeah, Ivor and Sunset, the old building, yeah.
And our RCA Studios. And that's where we recorded. Now, we came in and recorded that whole album in 4 days. Came and played it just like we played it. Now, the second album, that was different.
Yeah.
That's when Grace joined us. And then we brought partially, at that time, it was time to record again. And if people had half-finished songs or ideas of songs, then that's the really interesting time that we started to use the studio to flesh out material and have different people come in and do different things.
Sure.
And another interesting thing that happened then too is this. Considering we were at the Dolby Theater last night, there were no sound reductions back then. So you could only overdub twice really before the tape began to degrade. And you had to do everything over again. So people actually had to nail their parts up to a point. So but we just practice things relentlessly and then go to the part. One of the funny things for me is on the solo for the out-vamp solo for Somebody to Love, which has sort of become iconic on some levels. I know some of my 18-year-old son's buddies can play that better than I can now, they actually learned it off the record. But anyway, at the end of this thing, there was something that I really, if I had to do it, if I could fix it today, we would. That one last note wouldn't be there.
Duly noted.
They had the Razor Man back in those days.
Yeah.
And if you had to do an edit, it was a big deal. And if you were the guy that caused the edit, then you got the stink eye.
And not to mention that, studio time was costing you money.
Oh, yeah.
So if you had to go and cut up the tape.
Yeah. Yeah, Pillow, actually, that's the interesting line. That was recorded in 2 weeks also.
First one 4 days, the second one 2 weeks.
Yeah, we're already starting to waste time.
Right. So how much did you guys change Somebody to Love from the Great Society's version?
Oh, it's on the record, Jerry Garcia is listed as a spiritual advisor or something like that.
Can we answer that question once and for all? How involved was he?
Very, and he for me. Jerry had been playing in bands for years, whether it was jug bands or bluegrass bands, and he really had, especially the Warlocks and the Dead, subsequently the Dead, and he had that dynamic down, and his sensibilities were very good. He certainly wasn't a tyrant, but he really helped a lot with these structures of the songs, turning them into songs. Obviously, none of us were thinking about in those days yet, thinking about radio hits and stuff like that. But we got lucky with those 2 songs, so we changed it a lot. And Rick Jarrard, the guy that was the producer on that session and stuff, and they came up with these ideas, and for some unknown reason, we actually listened to them a little bit.
But I do remember that. I mean, that's a great rock song. For me, it was a great song to I wanted to push that song and just keep it just mashed to the wall. And that's why I got that running bass line going all over the place. And I remember working at the time, and I can remember when I listened back to the tracks, because we've been listening to these songs because the 50-year reunion will be, Jorma and I'll be playing songs we haven't played in a long time. And I would remember my hands and the positions of the notes when I got into the song to play along with it, to relearn, where it was headed here. And I remember when we did the sections in between the verses and the choruses, Paul was very instrumental in making sure that it wasn't the same. And this was typical Paul Kantner. He would not repeat, a lick or a refrain in between the verses and have it the same all the way through the song. He would say, no, we got to do something different. We got to do something different. And so when we go back to relearn these things, we remember, oh yeah, well, you got to learn this one here, and then the next verse 2, you got a different one here. Verse 3, you got a different one here. And right now, I can say in verse 1, "It's Somebody to Love," it's F sharp to E twice. In verse 2, it goes F sharp E B A.
I'm getting ahead.
And then verse 3 is open, and there's come back your eyes may, and then verse 4 is F sharp to B, and you'll hold the B.
Thanks,
and
Paul.
We worked that and then Jorma plays solo, and then you end on B, and that was the odd thing. We do stuff like that. You end on B instead of resolve back to it.
But that gave the music kind of its depth.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, no, absolutely.
And that's why we
absolutely.
rehearsed
There's every band has a formula and a logic to the way they work, but Paul's was different, absolutely. And in that spirit also, when we were doing the rundown the first day, the day before yesterday, we were doing this thing, and he's looking at me, he's going, well, I'm a lead guitar player, I don't need to know chords.
Welcome to my world.
So, you mentioned Rick Jarrard. I want to talk about him just for a minute, because he went on to produce Harry Nilsson. And,
absolutely.
He had a super cool
Absolutely,
career.
yeah.
Tell me about working with him and kind of what he brought, because producers back then could have a much stronger hand. It was kind of like
We didn't take direction well. I think Dave Hassinger was the engineer on that session too. He's another guy that was really important back then. We didn't take direction well, but I think that for me, we don't speak for each other. We only speak for ourselves. Jerry was one of the mediators. This is a good idea. You need to listen to this. You need to check that out. Rick Jarrard also, towards the end of the session, they were doing vocal overdubs. I was out in the reception thing out by Ivor Street, and I was playing Embryonic Journey, and Rick heard that and said, "You got to put it on the record." And I went, "Oh, come on, nobody wants to hear this folk stuff, Thanks, Rick. It's a really good idea.
Yeah. By the way, it sounded great last night.
I think that's one of the great things about that album. The different kinds of songs. Marty had coming back to me, and the atmosphere on the album. Now, at the time, I remember when we finished that album, we thought Rick Jarrard's footprint was way too much in the echo department and all that sound. Now I listen to it, and it is the sound of the times. But interestingly enough, that sound that we got in there became a whole sound for the album. And that's what's rather interesting compared to a lot of music today. Like Jorma said, he lived with an album for a year, one album for a year. People did that back then. They lived with surrealistic pillow for a year, and then you made another album. And as you made that next album, then you heard how the band progressed, because it was a band, and you were all learning all along and young and going in different directions. That's what really changed in the music industry, I think, or not the industry, the fan base. We existed on our fans, not through making gold record after gold record, something like that. It was our fan base and our in-live performance that really separated San Francisco from a lot of other, manufactured pop acts and whatnot.
When Surrealistic Pillow came out, obviously, huge hits. You guys are arguably the biggest band in America. That was really Grace's introduction to the wider world. From your perspective, how did Grace joining the band change everything?
Well, by the way, I loved Grace last night.
Yeah, oh, she was
She has no verbal boundaries whatsoever. We'll talk about that. But Grace for me is one of the great voices of my time, and one of the great musicians. I think it's unfortunate she doesn't do music anymore, but that's just how it is. She just had such a left-handed way of looking at stuff, and she had that trick voice, you know. And there's that quality that she had. I don't know how to describe it, but you know what I mean. Yeah. And it just changed everything, you know. A lot of it had to do with her attitude also. Thanks, Grace. and all that stuff, you know. But I think she was very important. But the thing is, what Jack said is also true. You know, we didn't have a leader really. I mean, we didn't have a front person. I mean, people go, Grace like the. Yeah, she was a front person in a lot of ways, and so was Marty, and so was Paul, whatever. But we were a band, and everybody was a contributing musician, and that's sort of a different headspace with a lot of stuff too. So the chemistry of her, you know, working with us and kicking us in the ass a lot of times, you know, when she wanted something to be harder or this or that.
Oh, talk about that a little bit. I mean,
well, you know, as you could tell from listening to her last night, Grace likes it the way she likes it, you know, and if changes needed to be made. I mean, but nobody was shy like that. Marty, Paul, whatever. It was all.
And we all had a good sense of humor about it. I mean, it was often said that Grace had a bigger set of balls than Marty. You know, and she was one of the first ones to step up, not be just nice harmony in the band.
She was badass.
I mean, later on, you know, I'm sure Grace is the one you want to talk to about her various things that she's done in her career. But I was talking to her last night, and I see her from time to time because I live in Los Angeles, she lives out in Malibu. And when we were doing some of these, this 50-year timeline from when we started out with Jefferson Airplane, we were all learning a bunch of her songs for a couple of shows Jorma and I did with Rachel Price, singing Grace's parts. And like Jorma mentioned, Eskimo Blue Day, I was listening to all this kind of stuff and the nutty stuff. And I told her last night, I said, Grace, you never held me back about playing a certain thing. She said, I just sit back, Jack, and listen to you play what you do on my songs. And she had that classical background, but she had interesting chord changes and interval work that would lead me off to some really bizarre interval on the bass. And I would work the bass all the way low to the last note on the bass up there and put these lines together. And they were much more almost in a classical format. But she had that interesting aspect of composing on the piano of the songs, you know, aside from the lyrics, you know, which were not, baby, baby, baby lyrics. So Grace brought an area, you know, is solid and unique and interesting as Jorma or myself or Paul or anybody else in there to the band that led us in different directions. Grace was a force on stage. I could do anything I wanted emotionally with her material because it wasn't ever narrow. And I think she was one of the first ones to ever do that. Yeah. You know.
So I have to ask you, the video mentioned that the band played it, arguably, the three most iconic music festivals, you know, Monterey Pop, Woodstock, Altamont. But before you played Monterey Pop, you played the Monterey Jazz Festival.
Right. That's correct.
And the very famous, and I love this, Leonard Feather review. Leonard Feather, the very famous jazz critic, reviewed the Airplane's performance at the 1966 Jazz Fest and said the following: all the delicacy and finesse of a mule team knocking down a picket fence.
And we used that quote in our ad copy for
Absolutely. But conversely, we used to get great praise from Ralph Gleason, who
very early on was completely into you guys.
You know, who was another jazz critic.
Yeah. How aware were you? Yeah, because Ralph Gleason wrote very positively about the band. John Wasserman wrote very positively about the band. Were you guys kind of tuned into that, or did it not matter?
Well, sure. I mean, you know, Ralph especially. We used to say, if it's okay with with RG, it's okay with you and me. I mean, you know, he was the man, you know, so to get respect from a guy in that position really meant a lot, because we got dissed by a lot of people and stuff like that. I mean, I know on some level, you know, we obviously don't get into this game to please everybody, but it's nice to be liked, you know. And so when a guy with his kind of creds actually gave us that respect, that was awesome, you know. And he blazed the way in a lot of ways for guys like Wasserman to also look at the music that people like us and some of our other brothers and sisters in the Bay Area that did, and see the music that was there, and not, you know, whatever, you know what I mean.
Sure. So tell me about Monterey Pop. What most singular memory from Monterey Pop for you?
Most singular memory. That's a good one. Otis Redding.
Yeah, that's a good one. Did you guys immediately precede him on stage?
Now you're pushing it. I'd have to see the movie.
Yeah. I think that's what I read. You guys were on just before.
Well, I had the original copy of Green Onions, Booker T and the MGs, and I always wanted to see that band play.
Yeah.
So see Otis, and then have the recording stacks full main group, you know, Steve Cropper and Doug Dunn and Al Jackson on drums play. That was something that I was really looking forward to, and it was, of course, that night. I mean, that performance that Otis did is just something that it gives me chills just thinking about it.
Yeah.
And so I was just pinned right in front. But I got to say, Robbie Schenker was a big one too. You know, that festival having all that different kinds of music at it was. We were all out there listening to everything all the time, and there's nothing musicians like better than hear other good musicians.
Sure.
And one of the things that you might or might not mention, of course, because it was the first time anybody saw Jimi Hendrix.
Yes.
And he was awesome, absolutely, no question about that. But he broke a guitar on purpose. See, I'm sorry.
Well, then you had the Who come out and do the same thing. But we didn't realize.
I didn't get that either. I mean, as did the Move before the Who.
Actually,
okay, you're right.
Actually, there were people in the acid that had imbibed in the acid world, and they were watching all this going along. You know, they were just fine, and all of a sudden, there's somebody just thrashing and killing your guitar, and they're all in the audience.
I love that guitar.
But you know, later on we found out that Jimmy and the Who, coming out of that English format, you know, that they were doing the battle of the on-stage performance that was completely foreign to the West Coast audience.
Sure. I read that, I believe in April of '67, McCartney came to visit you guys.
Yes, came.
I smoked pot with Paul McCartney. I gotta tell you that.
You know,
I just found a picture of us at my apartment that I shared with Marty, with Jorma and us all.
Yeah, real nice guy, real nice fella. Yeah.
Did he? Was he the one who mentioned Hendrix to you guys?
No, the first time, you know, it's kind of funny how that goes, you know. The first time I heard about him was, you got to see this guy, he's going to be at Monterey, he's blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Did you guys like take McCartney on the tour of San Francisco or something?
You know something? That's a good question. See, Jack and Marty had this apartment right on the Panhandle, which is sort of like ground zero for all that stuff. I was living in the Western Addition over near the Fillmore, which was ground zero for other stuff.
Well, when Paul was with one of his road managers, I believe, and so he came over and I heard that he wanted to meet me. We talked a bunch, and then later on we went out to, I'll never forget it, on Van Nuys, there was that big steakhouse, right? Paul's a vegetarian. Yeah, and no, not Tommy's, the one on Van Nuys.
Van Ness.
I mean.
Van Nuys.
Van Ness. Big steakhouse or something like that. We had, you know, in one of the stuffy places with red leather seats and all that.
Who paid for the check?
But in any case, you know, he came to visit and check everybody out. You know, to me, he was a nice guy. You know, absolutely.
He was a Beatle. What does he have to be?
Well, you know, there was all that going on, but you know, still, the guys themselves try to flesh that out. You write about this stuff. But somebody's saying you want to go give a bite to eat, you go get a bite to eat.
Yeah.
It isn't, oh, I don't get a bite to eat. So, you know, as the years go on, you know, some of this, you got to remember, we all kind of start out in the in your room somewhere playing a guitar and figuring out how to make a chord, and it takes you, as you always said, it leads you to these places, you know, and wonderful places in our career, and we're very thankful.
But this way, you know, Jack, you can always go, well, you know, Paul McCartney and I were.
Yeah, exactly. Talking about heavy shit, man. But no, it's probably talked about nonsense. But you know,
So I'm running out of time, and there are a couple things I want to cover. Next year, summer next year, 50th anniversary. You guys are gonna get tired of the 50th anniversary stuff. Is 50th anniversary Summer of Love?
Ah, the Summer of Love.
Which we will actually be doing an exhibit here at the Grammy Museum about the Summer of Love. Yeah. You guys will have to come back.
I'm here.
I'd love to. He lives here.
I'm right down the street.
Can I stay at your house?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll have the guest bathroom finished by then.
You know, I just need a quick aside. I was on in 2003, I did a transcontinental motorcycle trip with a friend of mine, and Jack had graciously invited us to stay at his place. I have never seen somebody, this gentleman here, instruct another person how to fold a futon more precisely.
I was trained well. Thank you, Diana.
Memories, particularly of summer, the Summer of Love. Gigs that maybe you were doing in the city at that time.
Well, we had a lot of gigs everywhere. I mean, and Paul had a lot to do with this, trying to get us to play outdoors all the time. Free concerts here, free concerts there, the Golden Gate here, different parts of the Golden Gate. We played the Panhandle. I was telling a friend of mine, when I had that apartment with Marty on Phil Street, the Panhandle right across, it's just a strip between two streets that leads into Golden Gate Park. We got a flatbed once, and we played on the flatbed, and the whole band was on the flatbed. The flatbed's the size of this here, and a couple of Fender amps and all of that, and you fired it up with a power generator, and you did a show, and you'd play there, and free, nothing. We just try to be like Commander Unit, show up. Now the things in Golden Gate Park were really the precursors to festivals later, because nobody knew who was going to show up or not, and it wasn't the Summer of Love yet. It wasn't branded yet. And so it was just we were home a lot. We weren't touring relentlessly or any of that. So we played out at the beach. We always joke about it because the fog rolls in, and it's a great line for a song. But if you're trying to play in the fog, it's 20 degrees all
Everybody loves outdoor gigs except the musicians.
So those things were starting to happen. That's what I remember about it being really great. We were up for anything. Somebody get an idea and they put it out there, and all of a sudden the equipment, the sound system.